Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Inside the Psychopathic Mind podcast. Again, Jason Smith with Carl Giacono. Carl, how are you today?
Hey, Jason, pretty good today.
All right, so we have a very special guest. It's Dr. Michael Segal. Michael, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, doctors.
All right, so just going to give a little background on Dr. Segal. He's a licensed clinical psychologist. He's been an adjunct faculty member for many different universities. He trained in psychology for 2 years at Cook County Jail in Chicago and 1 year at a juvenile detention center in Illinois. He began his federal law enforcement career in 2003 as a staff psychologist. He transitioned in 2007 to U.S. Probation Office as a U.S. probation officer in the District Court of District of Columbia. He returned back to the prison system in 2012. He's been at many different roles, such as a drug abuse program coordinator, chief psychologist, associate warden, and lastly, warden. And that was the role that he had when he retired from the federal prison system in 2024. Currently, he's working as a partner in his wife's practice called Sessions with Segal, and he's a consultant for creative corrections. So thank you again, Michael, for joining us, and I'll let Carl start us off. Go ahead, Carl.
Yeah, Michael, with you joining us, I really appreciate it. We kind of have a kindred spirit, all of us having worked for the federal government and the prison systems, which we could always do a podcast at some point just about that and some of the stories that go along with that. But I think, given all your roles that you've done, although I guess you identify with being a psychologist, but having worked the custody side of the fence as well, probably gives you a unique perspective of some of the difficulties that mental health workers have when they work in those kind of settings. I mean, looking back, I've seen that when I worked in custody, I always aligned somewhat with custody because I felt that they don't want these people committing crimes and hurting people. I don't want these people getting out and committing crimes and hurting people. And inmates that want to change, they also don't want to do that. So when you can kind of find a common ground, I think, for working in those settings, you become much more productive. Now, I know in those settings, there's always a testing period. Like when I started working at the one jail, they'd keep me in the Sally Port for about 20 minutes every time, which I didn't take it personally. I just laughed because I feel, we got a lot of people in our profession that are kind of, Looney Tune or a little bit, they're out of touch with what goes on in a prison setting. So I felt that seemed fair for them to test me and see if I had anything to offer. I mean, that seemed like a fair request on their part. Just as having done forensic work, when you go into the court setting, kind of the judge is God. So you go in the court setting, you're kind of humble and you follow the rules and you do this and that. This is the nature of life. We adapt and adjust to where we go in. But this is a particularly difficult setting, particularly depending on the custody setting and how many inmates and so forth. So maybe you could start out by talking about how you got from point A to point B as far as the psychologist and then roles as warden and different things like that, and what those transitions were like for you.
Certainly. Again, thank you, gentlemen, for having me on today. I truly do appreciate it. My career in psychology started in Chicago. I was fortunate enough to get accepted into a PsyD program in Chicago, and through that program, got my first practicum at Cook County Jail. Cook County Jail is the nation's largest one-site pre-sentencing facility. LA County has more detainees than Cook County. However, LA County has multiple buildings. Cook County has one site. And it was there that I started working with other psychologists on my practicum that I was introduced to this world of correctional psychology. I had heard of forensic psychology, and that's why I chose in the school that I got accepted to, because of their forensic program. And I wanted to work with the court system and apply the law to psychology, understand testing, psychometrics, and how it applied there. And through the world of correctional psychology at Cook County, I began to understand there was so much more out there. We would have, as a correctional psychologist, the ability to work with populations most psychologists would never get the chance to interact with or try to help in their entire careers. I noted the underserved population in these correctional settings. And I thought there could be no better calling than to do this kind of work. So that was the route I took. Spent
I
a
noticed one thing, Michael, when you bring that up that's interesting, is your mindset for going into that. It's more of a forensic legal, and you were going in from that perspective rather than as a treater to save the world. Now, obviously, there can be a shift, and you're going to tell us probably you got into doing treatment as well. But still, that mindset provides a structure, unlike many of the people that work in our field that go into an institutional setting with preconceived notions they learn in graduate school about how inmates are, how they function, what they're going to do, and often bringing their template of the world into there, rather than as Jackelson and Samanel kind of did, is understanding the criminal from the criminal's perspective and coming up with things like kindness is weakness and so forth, coming in with an open mind. So that probably was a good starting point for you, I imagine, and made the transition, I'm going to guess, smoother as you talk about it. You came in with a different perspective.
You are on point with that one. It truly did. It gave me the ability to see things a bit differently, understand the situation differently. It didn't cause me to be sympathetic. I was more empathetic to the surroundings. From there, I learned about this thing called the BOP, the Federal Bureau of Prisons. Back in the day, more than 20 years ago, it was just about impossible to get a job as a psychologist with the Bureau. Not because they didn't want psychologists, but because it was such a sought-after field. I was fortunate enough to come on as a staff psychologist at Oakdale in 2003, where we started a program called SMOOTH, the Special Management Unit, which dealt with individuals who were shot callers, leaders, or known instigators of riots and disturbances in federal facilities. It was a unit full of sociopaths.
Now sociopath or psychopath?
Sorry, psychopath, not sociopath. Sociopath, and that'll show you how old I am as we then go back into the DSM-1 and things like that.
There you go.
Now, here is one thing, though, and gentlemen, I'll ask that you talk about this or ask me about this in a little while, which will be as I go through my career and eventually become warden, then going about and educating the staff as to what a psychopath is and what a sociopath isn't, which doesn't exist. So there was a constant battle as I went through my career of battling against myths that people had, the sensationalized Hollywood idea of serial killers and sociopaths, and trying to then educate my staff, not only to the psychology world of things, but to how to interact and then deal with individuals who had factors 1 or factors 2 on our scales that we look at for psychopathy. So thank you for catching that one. Most of the folks I interacted with throughout my career would have been like, yeah, they're all sociopaths. And we're like, no, that's not really a thing, but Hollywood has made it a thing, which makes it even more difficult for folks like yourself, psychologists within the criminal justice system, to work through that and get that work done. So yes.
Sometimes with that, Michael, I think it's almost a politically incorrect issue. Some people don't like the harshness of the word psychopathy, so they gravitate to sociopathy. I remember in doing a lot of training, I trained years ago when I was still in California, and I flew back to the Northeast. It might have been Bridgewater State Hospital. I did this lengthy presentation on psychopathy and how people high on psychopathy have more risk for certain things. And one social worker, now the psychologists are the same, but in those days they were just a social worker, says, well, Dr. Giacono, I'm offended by your use of the word psychopathy. Now that was the take on my whole presentation of 4 hours. But the custody staff, lieutenant that attended the training, he said, Dr. Giacono, I'd like you to come back and talk to the rest of my staff. So I went back and talked to the captain and the custody staff about how this could be used to monitor high-risk offenders, so forth, and it was very well received. So we do have that propensity or tendency in our profession where people tend to be easily offended and kind of PC that they get on bandwagons about things and they move away from the empirical data. The empirical data is very sound.
And that's where we can have difficulties. Things like, again, that terminology where people might take offense, or they have this memory of seeing it once on a news show or in a movie, and now they believe everyone has MPD, multiple personality disorder. And
Oh boy.
then you have to explain that one. Yet it's the same thing too, though, for other folks, let's say custody, folks who aren't used to custody, and you'll hear individuals say, well, can't the sharpshooter just shoot the gun out of their hand? And then they have to explain that's impossible to do from 400 yards away with wind and everything else. So as I went through my career, there was quite a bit of that, of trying to educate individuals into the true terminology and the meanings of this terminology. So from there, I ended up going to U.S. probation. I stayed in the Federal Bureau of Prisons for a little over 3 years, and then I took a position to serve at the will of the court for the District Court of the District of Columbia.
Now, what was your thinking that went from the one to the other? You're a psychologist, now you go to probation.
I was in the process of interviewing with the U.S. Secret Service to become an 1811 criminal investigator special agent with them. And as I was leaving the Bureau of Prisons, my warden sat me down, asked me not to go, and it was very nice of him. It really was. His name was Warden Young. And I said, boss, it's time for me to go. I'm going to go be a special agent. He said, that's a shame. I really thought that, you were going to stick with us. It's like, do me a favor, while you're out there in the world, check out this group called U.S. Probation. I think you would do really well at that. Okay, I have no idea. I'm going to go be a special agent and jump on helicopters. Woo! And I got to DC, and I'm going through the process, interviewing, doing, my panels, my physicals, and there's an opening at U.S. Probation. And my wife said, put in for it. See what happens. I put in for it. I got it. I became a CL 1811, which is a court level special agent. So U.S. Probation Officer, special agent. And I started working in DC with individuals who were pre-sentence. So I was writing PSIs, pre-sentence investigation reports, as well as working with individuals when they released to the community as a supervision officer.
Well, I was going to let this ride and ask you later, Michael, but your skills as a psychologist and that knowledge of psychopathy must have been very helpful, even if you weren't using the term in doing those evaluations.
So depending on the setting and my role, it was. When I was in the courtroom writing pre-sentence reports, and for everyone out there, a pre-sentence report in the federal system is a report that's put together for the court, for the judge who will issue the sentencing for this individual. And this only occurs after a person has been found guilty. This report will include facts about the crime. It'll also include their social background, their demographics, their history, their sibship. Did they have siblings? Where were they born? Who were their parents? What went on? It gives you a story about their entire life. And this is where that really came into play, because I was able to write about things from a different perspective. And then the judges, since I was their agent, we would have many conversations in chambers as to possible implications of this person, what they were doing, what would happen if they went here, what would happen if this went on. So there, yes, I was in all my glory with my forensic background in court and doing that. Very fulfilling.
Well, Michael, I got a comment on that. This was unexpected. I didn't know you would be talking and these points would come up, but this is really cool because what I found in training large institutions and things about psychopathy, I would often train the social workers and the psychiatrists on the short version of the PCLR, the screening version, not the whole version, because the psychologists I would train to do the assessments. But the point I'm making, psychopathy as a construct can be used in training other professionals for things to look for and a different way of thinking about the inmates, particularly related to risk. After my training and doing this, you'd see different things in the notes that you wouldn't have seen before. So yeah, what you're describing with that role as a psychologist in that kind of environment, any environment we go into, we can train different levels of personnel, whether it's custody or whatever, about the construct. And they begin to look at things differently, and they begin to record different information.
Yes. And that was the joy of working with the courts. Very cerebral. I mean, again, these judges, Article 3 judges, and the MAGs, the magistrate judges are given a term of 10 years. Article 3 judges are put in for a lifetime at the federal sentence. They're there forever. And they really wanted to get to know the people that they were about to sentence. They wanted to know everything about their lives, and they wanted different perspectives of what was causing things to happen. They wanted to know the why.
You
While in,
know, but I'm
sorry.
interrupting you all the time because what you're saying is so interesting. Like, I have to just shut up and listen to you. But that can be so different than many mental health workers. And I found the same experience. They're interested in data, the whys, why does it happen? Many mental health people go into these environments with preconceived notions about what's going on, and they're not real interested in the data. To the extreme is the kind of hysterical mental health worker that I don't want to read the charts and be biased when I go see this person. Whereas if I'm going to see somebody, they stay in the jail cell until I know everything about their history. You don't come out to I mean, but that kind of perspective is just what you're saying is very interesting. Go ahead now if I didn't ruin your train of thought.
No, you're fine. Don't worry. My thought has no train. It's off the rails a long time ago.
Okay, good.
And that was a little different than on the supervision side. See, on the pretrial side, dealing with the court, the individual knows they're caught. It's done. Game up. All right, you got me on this one. Now, when the individual on the supervision side releases from prison and is back in the community, the game is afoot again. And this is where it becomes very difficult as a supervision officer to keep up with this person. The reports, the jobs. You got fired from your job? I didn't get fired. We both decided it wasn't for me. The guy's an idiot. I
Heard
need to
that.
go this way. I need to go that way. And it makes it very difficult for a supervision officer to manage their caseload when they have individuals who have multiple factor ones and twos on that list, which is causing their score to skyrocket past 30. You're trying to understand as a supervision officer, why can't this person keep the job? Why aren't they meeting me for these meetings? Why aren't they doing this? Why isn't this happening? And you're used to dealing with other individuals who, let's say, they just got out of the United States Penitentiary and they were there for a murder and they know it. And they're like, okay, now I'm out. And look, dude, I smoked weed. Yeah, you got me. While the individual who would score high on these scales that you're supervising will say, I walked by a dispensary and I must have gotten secondhand smoke in me, and that's why I'm high. And the lying is there, the manipulation is there.
Yes.
And that's just with the guys. Then, when you're supervising females as well on supervision, other things will come in. Well, I can't make it because I have to watch my kids. Okay, well, go ahead, bring the kids in for a meeting. We have a play area in the office.
Yeah.
Oh, well, and the moment you start to dig a little deeper, ask a
Yes.
second
There you
level
go.
question, it all unravels. However, the amount of work you have to do as a supervision officer with these folks to try to get them to successfully reintegrate into the community is maddening. You will spend 95% on your time on 2% of your caseload.
That's what I was going to ask you. How do you prioritize and how do you determine who those 2% are?
You hopefully have in the U.S. probation system, hopefully you have a good SUSPO, which is a supervising United States probation officer, someone who has their group, their cadre of USPOs, U.S. probation officers, and you staff the case with them constantly. Because
Huh.
on top of having a supervising officer who you can discuss your caseload of, think as a psychologist or a practicum student, you go to your supervisor and you get some supervision on your caseload. The same thing happens with the supervisory probation officers. The thing is, though, each one of these individuals were sentenced by different judges. And you can have 14, 15 Article 3 judges who each expect something different from a supervision caseload. So now you're serving 15 masters, and one will say, well, if they pop hot, meaning if they have a dirty urinalysis for some type of drug, once or twice it's okay, enroll them in programming. While you might have another judge who says, one positive, I want them back in my courtroom and we're going to send them back to prison. So it makes it very, very difficult for that frontline officer to figure out their caseload and work with it. And that's why if you were to go ahead and give a presentation on psychopathy, on the scale, the average USPO won't really want to know or have the time to understand what these factors really mean and what they do. Like if you did the old MMPI, they would just want to know anybody score over 70? Okay, well, we can do an item analysis on this. We can go through each factor and figure out why the USPO doesn't have time. They just need
A
to know.
question about that, Michael. Then how would you translate psychopathy into something usable that would be usable to them? And let me give you an example. Because, at least when I looked at the data in the old days, police officers that pulled someone over, when they would get shot or there was a police shooting, they were often the people turned out to be psychopaths. So there's certainly behaviors that put someone in a group that are higher risk for psychopathy, even if one doesn't talk about psychopathy. Did you have certain kinds of people that were targeted to be in that 2-3% that even without using the word psychopaths, they likely were on the psychopathy checklist somewhere?
So within being a USPO or within US probation, there are 94 judicial districts. Most districts divide their caseloads into, at the time when I was there, we had something called PICRA, PCRA, and individuals would get a score, and you would determine, much as in the Federal Bureau of Prisons, where you have scores depending on what type of facility they would go to. U.S. probation would then divide the individuals into caseloads. You would have a low risk caseload,
There
you
you
would have
go.
a mental health caseload, and then you had high risk caseload. Most of the individuals who scored high on these measures would be in the mental health caseload, which I had quite a bit of. I can't tell you how many people every day throw something lit at the White House. It's incredible how many people will ride a bicycle from Louisiana to DC, get off their bicycle with the samurai sword and say they're here to do something. And they would end up on my caseload. So you
Yeah.
had that, and then you had the high risk offenders. And those were the folks that what you would do to manage that then is you would start to come up with your own checklist of if this and that, we're not waiting for the next thing. We know right away, have that form ready to go to submit to the court to bring them before because most of the individuals, most psychopaths don't care about you as a USPO. You are the lowest person on that seniority list. They care nothing about, oh, I missed a meeting with you. Oh, no. It's not until they reach that higher level of authority, like a judge or a CUSPO, a chief U.S. probation officer, that they start to pay attention. So that's what you could do to manage that caseload is come up with the shortcuts to stop it before. While that might sound harsh, that might sound mean, these weren't folks normally trying to reintegrate into society in a way we would consider successful. They were trying to reintegrate on their own terms into society.
You're also highlighting with those different caseloads something that we don't talk a lot about. In fact, I don't think we mentioned it till now, Jason, is the differences between affective and predatory violence. A lot of those mentally ill people and doing things, throwing a bomb just sporadically someplace or there, or fireball, whatever they do, these are people who are mentally ill and they're usually responding to paranoid delusions or affectively somebody does something and they act out, which is often different than the typical psychopathic violence, which tends to be predatory and planned out, although psychopaths can do both.
Yes.
So yeah, your caseload would differentiate to a certain extent just by chance, those kind of things. Well, there are other things then? Well, it sounds like an extremely difficult job. And I know when I worked with people in different forms of probation, the caseloads were just astronomical, the actual numbers. So what happens after that? And do you go to be a warden after you've been a PO for a while?
So we're in DC. My wife and I are in DC. We have our first child and absolutely love DC. A bit of history. My dad was born in DC. One of my children were born in DC. I love Washington, DC through and through. I'm not Virginia. I'm not Maryland. I am DC. But the joy of living in DC is that you really have to have an income close to six figures a year, in the high six
Yeah.
figures, to even afford to live there. So I started putting in for other agencies. I got picked up by HSI, Homeland Security. And before I said yes to transferring over to be a special agent with them, my wife mentioned we could go back to prison. I said, what do you mean? She said, the folks there, the BOP folks, were always friendly. It was always family. If something was going on at the joint, they would call me, let me know, hey, can't tell you what's going on, but Doc's going to be a little late tonight. She's like, I appreciated that. Why don't you try that? Well, I went ahead, called up some friends of mine in the BOP. I said, this sounds crazy, I know, but do you have anything open? And in the almost 6 years I've been gone, the BOP exploded in facilities. They grew quite a bit. I was fortunate enough to find a facility near DC named Hazleton, USB Hazleton. It's 4 hours away from DC. I got the job. I started working there. That allowed my wife to shut down her practice in DC and cycle out. We moved there, and I was at Hazleton as the DAPC. I was a DAPC at the USP, where I learned if Muhammad won't go to the mountain, you bring the mountain to Muhammad. So what we started there as a DAPC was we started our non-residential groups in the housing units. We were having a hard time getting individuals to come all the way down to psychology to see us.
Let me ask you a question about that. Was this before they started, in all their wisdom, offering time off for completing the program?
For non-res, there was no time off. So yes, this was before. And then they even started offering time off. However, individuals who are housed at a USP normally do not meet the criteria
Nice.
to have time off.
So the people that you're selling on the program, you're actually getting people who want to change.
Well, they're wanting to change if we go to them.
Right, still.
So we're meeting them, Prochaska di Clemente, stages of change. We are trying to grab all the pre-contemplative folks we can. So start doing that. And while we're doing that, let's open up a female joint down low, which we have the SFF, and we're going to start a residential program there too. So I was able to help start out the residential program for the females. We hired another psychologist as a co-DAPC. She ran that. I ran the USP, and then they opened up the medium. So then I covered the USP and the medium. Got to know things as a DAPC, worked there for a while, and I was like, you know what? I want to try to be a chief. I was accepted and selected for the chief psychologist at MDC Brooklyn, which is the nation's largest federal detention center. Population varies every day. I was there for several years, got picked up as an associate warden. After that, I went to FMC Devens, the Federal Medical Center in Devens, right outside of Fort Devens. So for those of us old timers, we know it as Fort Devens, not FMC Devens. Then from there, I got picked up to go to USP Tucson. I was there approximately 1 year before I got picked up to become a warden at FCI Pekin, just outside of Peoria, Illinois. And then I moved on to Waseca, where I was selected as the warden there. That's why I retired. I spent a lot of time at the ADX as the acting complex warden over the Supermax, if you want to call it, at Florence. They were shorthanded there. I spent almost half of my last year in the Bureau at the ADX and decided to call it a day.
In those systems, Michael, it's besides the ones I worked at FCI Bastrop. I was a chief psychologist, and I was the drug abuse coordinator down at the Fort Worth, the medical center. But I would go and do a lot of training. And in my experience, usually if someone got to be a warden, they were brighter, or they had somewhat sharp, or they had something going on. The AWs, that was kind of a different story. It was like that.
AW stands for always wrong.
Okay. Yeah, I never came up with that one, but I could notice one guy that was an AW was he was in the National Guard or something. He made it to corporal in the National Guard. So I mean, but it was that kind of thing. But if you usually got to be warden, you had to be a little more intelligent. And I had respect for most of the wardens, and there were some good AWs, but yeah, it seemed to be a different level. Okay, so now you look back at this. What were the conflicts for you, if any, in serving in those various roles and being both the psychologist and then more on the custody side?
There were a ton of them, a ton of them. But one of the things, actually, two things that I can talk about is trying to get the different disciplines to all work together. You had the knowledge base in psychology who understood psychopaths, understood the makeup, understood what was going on. And then I had to balance that with the other disciplines. I had to balance it with unit team, the folks who ran the housing units, in custody, who didn't care what their score was, that they scored a 34 on a certain exam, who they just tell us what we have to do. Do I have to lock them up? Do I have to put someone next to them? Do I put them on a 2 hour watch? What do I do? What do I do? And trying to get the different departments to understand each other and to work past these issues. And at the same time, then noticing the difference between the way a psychopath interacted with me as I moved up the chain and my authority grew. How quick were they to dismiss me rather than how quick were they to try to avoid me or make sure everything was okay with me as I went up and up? Much the same as in US probation, where the mainline officer got no respect from the person and games were played all the time. It's why USPO would say, even though there weren't games,
Well, could
compared
you
to a judge.
could you say a little bit about that, Michael, and the gender differences? The way they would size people up and respond to you depended on your role.
Yes. So, and again, these are just my observations. I do
Yeah,
not have a list of recent journal articles on this or anything else.
you won't get
My,
them anyway coming out of academic settings, anything other than political correct ones. So your observations are probably more relevant.
don't get me started on my poor dissertation. That lit review was terrible because there was nothing out there on female offenders and how they scored on certain procedures. One of the things I noticed, let's take males. Most people are comfortable discussing males and being a psychopath. If my little spidey sense was going off and I knew someone was, let's say, pulling my leg about their description of an event, and I called them on it, not in an accusatory like, you're lying. No. But if I was like, really, dude, seriously, that's the story you're going with, they would start cracking up and they're like,
Yeah,
all right, you got me. Yeah. There was no hate. There was no cutting off. There was like, all right, this time it didn't work with this cat. But you know what? Next time it might. I'll try it again and I'll try it again and I'll try it on this person. I'll try it on that person. There was no, there wasn't a sense of being dismissed by males. They were
no.
like, "Meh."
What I call with the males, Michael, it's kind of like you're sitting in a room with them and they're bullshitting you, and they know they're bullshitting you, and they know that you know that they're bullshitting you, and they know that you know. So you end up just a few minutes into the bullshit, you end up both laughing, and then
Yeah.
they go on and try to do it again. Yeah,
As the lyrics go, game recognized game.
yeah,
So that was exactly the way it felt. Now with females, it was my observation that was different. Again, I worked with females at Cook County Jail. I worked with females at Hazleton. I worked with females at Brooklyn. I worked with females at Tucson. Most people don't know there are females at Tucson, but they are. There's a pretrial facility there at Tucson. I worked with females at Pekin, and I worked with females at Wasika. And one thing I noticed at every single level, and I worked with females in US probation, was that if I called them on their game, on their lies, on their superficial storytelling, where you couldn't go deeper into a story. If, I think Jason has mentioned it several times, you were such a good mom. Well, then why did the police find
yes,
your kids in a house with no food, no electricity, and just, like dog feces everywhere? holy cow, the female would become irate, and that was it. She wasn't talking to you again. However, as I moved up, if I had an interaction with the female and I started discussing, face validity of what she was saying, her actions, or anything like that, they would normally become superficially sorrow. I would notice sorrow and a bit of submission, which was
Huh.
almost like a learned response to, if I do this, maybe he'll stop calling me on stuff and it'll just be okay. While the guy would just be like, dude, you got me. Okay, let me do this again. But as a psychologist, if I said something to them in the prison, they were ready to kill me.
Yes.
They would scream and yell, and who do you think you are? Never happened as I started going up. So I noticed a difference. Also, I noticed, as you were just saying, Doc, that the males could tell when things weren't really. I noticed that females had a much keener sense of observation, of understanding and knowing when someone could see through what they were saying. And I could see
Michael,
that in the facilities often.
yes, Jason and I have talked a lot about this, both in the episode. I didn't know if you wanted to make a comment before I make a comment, Jason.
Go for it. Yeah, I was going to
Yeah.
follow up when Michael's
Okay.
done. Yeah.
Yeah, we've written a lot about this. The idea of what the females experience these are the psychopathic ones is a pseudo dependency and a pseudo affectivity. And what that means with the dependency, they're dependent on particularly the male examiners and the female ones that we've talked to for helping to regulate their self esteem, feedback to them that they're okay, and also regulating their moods. So, on the run of the mill psychologists, they tend to incorporate you into this kind of way of helping them manage their emotional states, which, unlike this male psychopath who tends to be narcissistic and you're not affecting them, they don't give a shit. It's like that. The females are dependent on approval and seeking that kind of approval and setting up these things in the way you're describing. So it's just pointing out, it's very interesting what you talked about that. But we call that the pseudo affectivity and the pseudo dependency. It's not real dependency, but you're dependent. They're dependent on you for helping regulate psychological mechanisms within themselves. And like you said, that big one, Jason's talked about that a bunch. You make a comment and it's not you're yelling at them. The confrontation is just pointing out inconsistencies. So you're pointing out, you say you're a good mom, but they go home, there's no food, there's dog crap all over the floor. How's that go together? That's a confrontation. No one, you're not even saying it in a demeaning way, but boy, they'll go through the ceiling because they're dependent on you for the approval, feeding back to them they're a good person and maintaining that image. The male psychopath doesn't need that. I mean, we don't give a shit. They tell you a lie, you call them on the lie and you confirm it with 3 people sitting on the interview. They shrug their shoulder, then it's on to the next BS.
Oh,
Yes,
yeah.
if you were to, I'm sorry, Jason, it's
Yeah,
the
I was
same
just
way
going to
the
follow
guy
up.
would,
Yeah. Keep going, Steve.
the same way, and that mentality, I almost put it into a going on a Friday night bar setting for the guys. They'll sit there and ask the female, hey, you want to go home with me? No. Hey, you want to go home with me? No. They'll go 99 women. You want to go home with me? No. They don't care because eventually they're going to get one that says, yeah, okay, cool. I got it. And that's usually what I saw with the thinking of the guys. Whereas the females did not have that kind of idea. They were not okay with confrontation or being told no, if you will. Go ahead. I'm
Yeah.
sorry, Jason.
Oh, yeah, that was I may have mentioned it before, but I remember, yeah, there was a female inmate that pre a case of the inappropriate relations with the staff member, and I said, eventually you're going to get transferred to another facility, and what can you do for yourself? Boundaries for your own self to help protect you. And she thought I was blaming her, and wrote to my supervisor to say, yeah, this guy doesn't know what he's doing. So it was just like, I'm just trying to work through the treatment. But yeah, she took that as I was blaming her for being sexually abused and went above me, similar to what you're saying based on the lowest rung of staff psychologists as I've gone to resolve and chief. Yeah, you can see the differences between how the females interact with you. Yeah.
So
And
they're very,
that is a lot of what I saw. Now, with the females and psychopathy comes what I have seen is a very, very keen ability to discern individuals whom they can manipulate and mold their environment to their benefit. They will know which officer they can get that pen from, which officer they can get, whatever it is they need from. And they will push and stay away from the ones that they can't, or they will try to manipulate the situation to remove that officer, that staff member from their life in that area, that housing unit, whatever. Now, with the males, interestingly enough, as I worked at USPs, the ADX, you name it, most of the males did not belong to a car. The males who would score high on psychopathy. And by a car, prison slang for a gang. Most of them were not in gangs. They did not ride with anyone. They did not belong to a group. They were too smart for the group. They didn't get along with the group. The group was very political. The group is very structured. The gangs are all about business in a prison. And the psychopath is bad for business. So normally they weren't that involved in these gangs. The ADX, holy cow, the amount of individuals there who would have a perfect score. Every factor one and every factor two is insane, but that's why they're at the ad max. So the managing of an individual who would score high, who would have these traits, wasn't as much of a factor in the United States penitentiary as it would be at a normal female facility. However, the lower you went in security levels in the male facility, the more of a problem it was to manage individuals who would score higher on these types of assessments.
Michael, that's clinical support for the idea that when we look at psychopathy across culture or any other place, we look at a cutoff of 30. And we keep it at that because we have a certain assurance that the people above that 30 tend to be somewhat of a homogeneous group versus the idea of clinical cutoffs. What that means is at what score is a person likely to be a problem within this particular setting or under this supervision? And like you're saying, the lower the score goes, even if it's just some factor one items, say in a very low security setting, depending on their history, if it indicated manipulation, selling drugs, so forth, they're probably going to be a problem. So yeah, that's a piece that's sometimes confused in the academic literature. They're counting clinical cutoffs as categorical cutoffs, which is a real mistake.
And that was to bring up something from, my gosh, 25 years ago, my dissertation. I was very excited, guys, very excited. I found statistical significance between females charged with murder and females charged with other offenses. I found statistical significance on 2 of the MMPI 2 factors. Oh, is that proud? The only problem is there was absolutely no clinical relevance to it. Both groups scored over 70. And the way I had to explain it to people was, well, guess what, Doc? You have $30 million in the bank. I have $5 million in the bank. Is there a statistical significant difference between that amount? Yes. But at the end of the day, we're both millionaires. Who cares? We can do whatever we want. And that was the case with those females. And that's what we're seeing if we are just relying on the category and not then trying to apply what else is
Yes. Yeah, the clinical cutoffs from a perspective of practical usefulness are what you want to look at. But I would even like to go back and look at your MMPI data, because even if they were like that, it tells you something about their motivation for doing crimes. So, as the psychologist, even when we become custody or whatever else, we're always interested in why something happens, the motivation. A lot of the cases that Jason and I look like, we're going back and looking at the person and putting them into this person was basically a paranoid disorder, this person was that, or a borderline disorder, because it has a lot to do with the thinking pattern and why they did or how they ended up where they ended up. So yeah, I get excited about that too.
It's interesting because then you do have to look at certain things. How do you house someone with these traits in prison? How do you house them? Where do you house them?
Yes.
What happens when they make allegations? What kind of investigation do you have to do? Where are you going to move them to? You can't keep moving them here or there. No one wants to room with them. Holy cow, look, this fight started because this individual started the rumor, threw the pebble in the pond, sat back with the bag of popcorn, and just started eating that popcorn, watching the mayhem that they created because they were bored.
Yes. Well, this is the thing for mental health to always be aware of going in those settings is everything in every place you go is triaging. You can have pie and sky kind of ideas about this or that, but you got a 30-bed unit and you got 150 people vying for those beds. Do you want to get 3 psychopaths on that particular unit when it's a unit without a lot of structure and training? Or do you want to kind of try to get the people in there that you can actually help? Whereas mental health people don't like to think about that reality. If we're going to help everyone, where it comes down to very practical things. Like we only have so many beds. There's certain things in a housing setting like you're describing that some people would just be inappropriate. And not only that, when we get in institutional settings, the psychopaths often take advantage of real patients. So we're not only protecting staff, protecting patients, we're trying to triage, figure out the best place for a person to be. We're trying to keep everyone safe.
And that is a difficult thing, even on the pretrial side in the court, as we're getting ready for sentencing. We will also see a lot of females involved with crime who don't get arrested because of a Sir Lancelot effect in the community, where the arresting officer will be like, hey, dude, come on, take the other, go ahead, claim this, claim that. Don't send her to prison. She's got the kids. You're going. I'm going to put this on you. She's going to go ahead and stay home.
I want to refer you to a book written by Jason Smith and a couple colleagues on female psychopathy. In that book, he's got a whole chapter on bias and the myths of females. You're giving us kind of cool labels for some of those things that he talks about in that book. But yeah, you're right. This goes on. It's very real. We had hoped at some point to put on a podcast where we talk about those biases, and specifically, maybe you'd be a good person to come back on when we decide to do it. We could give you the breakdown of what we're going to talk about, and you would have some examples of these kind of things.
There are biases everywhere, and I am actually grateful for the biases. I am grateful for the individuals who have never had, I don't know if I'm grateful or jealous, envious of the individuals who have never had to pull back the curtain and see the Great Wizard of Oz.
Yeah.
Most folks go to court and they will believe everything this person is saying because there's no way that this could be made up. There's no way that anyone would ever say these things or, relate these experiences if they weren't real. And it's that naivete of the world then that allows the psychopath to continue getting away with things. And I am okay with the world being naive. I don't want people to necessarily have to experience the things the 3 of us have had to experience in our lives when interacting with individuals with these traits.
Yeah.
That's why, working to dispel the sensationalized Hollywood, Hannibal Lecter kind of ideas of what a psychopath is, and getting people to realize, holy cow, no, this other individual that I've been working with, wow, yeah, all these traits, the office mayhem that's going on, the stuff in the break room, you name it, it's wrecking my life. I hate Sundays. I don't want to go to work on Monday because of these people. I'm going to quit. I'm going to lose my job. I'll get kicked out of my house because of this person causing this. And this is where then I believe we have the responsibility to explain what this is, share what this is, so folks can identify it, understand it, or get a better understanding of it, and then learn how to cope and continue with their lives.
Because a lot of people, Michael, and we've addressed this in several things, not to the extent you're talking about, but to even talk more about, kind of the kind of counter-transference reactions and things we have to these people. Regular people, their tendency is to, if something goes wrong, well, what did I do wrong? And they spin their wheels and they're looking at that the whole time. And you're never going to get an answer when you're dealing with a personality disordered individual or a person like this. The question is, why is this person asking me this now? What did they do? Why am I feeling miscast now? Like there's an irreality here in the interaction, because this isn't because of me. I'm in a pretty good space, and then looking for answers. So yeah, it's such an important issue, that, and we try to touch on that. But I'm wondering, Jason, how are we doing at this point with Michael, and any additional questions we need to ask?
Uh, no, I guess any other insights as a warden of a female facility? I know when I leave, they go crazy. How was it when you didn't stick to your schedule?
Oh my goodness, I can't tell you the amount of times that I was fired. I was under indictment. Um, I had run off with so and so. The vacuum that was created when I was not there with this population was incredible. You have to be supremely confident in yourself and knowledgeable about your environment to A, work in such a facility, and then B, run the facility. Understanding that there were boundaries, strict boundaries you had to have there with the female population. Unfortunately, I happened to get selected to Wasika as the warden there during the Ray Garcia trial and debacle. For those that don't know, Ray Garcia was convicted of raping multiple women at FCI Dublin in California and is now serving a prison sentence, a
He was the
federal
warden
prison
there.
sentence. He was the warden there. And coming into that, which could be a whole nother podcast, gentlemen, on the advantage that was taken by psychopaths who weren't raped, who nothing had happened to them, but just of the political climate of what was going on in my position and the accusations that could be made on the heels of what was going on at Dublin was incredible. But if I didn't show up for a day, well, see, I told you the other day he looked at that inmate she released. He probably drove her home and now they're living together and he quit. Or I didn't show up. See, I told you he was stealing money and it was just a hornet's nest. I could literally be gone for one day, come back, and I'm like, oh my gosh, okay, here we go. Let's start again. This is why we get paid. Let's do this. Let's keep
Yeah,
going. It was incredible. Whereas the guys could make up a story and folks are like, yeah, who cares? Yeah,
yeah,
he's the walking figurehead. He's the warden. He doesn't do anything. No one cares about him except the psychopath who was like, hey, I'm someone important. You're someone important. We should talk about this thing I got going on. That's what the guys would do, while the females would try to create something to fill the void and vacuum of me not being there.
that's exactly, yeah. The gossip mill. I think I've quit, or I'm quitting. I've been at this prison 5 years. As of the other female facility, 6 years. Man, how many times I've quit? I think the best one was I was embezzling $80,000, just a random number that they came up with, and the warden was going to allow me to resign gracefully in like 2 weeks, and then I just went around, hey everybody, I'm still here. I guess I didn't get expelled, so or resigned or whatever. But yeah, it is comical on what they come up with in terms of the rumor mill, and I have to. Half my job sometimes is to dispel most of those rumors, whether it's a psychology or another part of the prison. So yeah, so you had that as well.
And Jason, did you find that the rumors were created not just for entertainment, but sometimes for them to get that sense of grandiosity, I am more important. I know this
Yeah.
information. People have to listen to me. It's not always just the let's eat popcorn and watch what happens.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's the
There's some
hey, all
secondary
eyes
gain.
on me. I know
Yeah.
this. I'm friends with so and so who's the warden's secretary, and she overheard this, so now I've got this. And oh, by the way, I'm also girlfriends with the warden's secretary, with the warden's, orderly who works up there, and that's how it
Hmm.
was an incredible attempt to maintain power, achieve power, and manipulate a situation for their own benefit and their gain, regardless of the effects on anyone else.
Well, they can't show them. They're above the like. They're not all on the same level. They had to show some hierarchy some way, and information or relationships. It seems like to be some point of part of that as well. Yeah. Yeah.
So that's what being the warden at two facilities with females and working at multiple places. It was difficult. Sometimes I thought my only allies at a facility were psychology and the SIS department. Those were the only folks who I could rely on to see through the smoke as to what the true nature of something really was at that time.
I listen to you and Jason talk, Michael. I get tired listening to you talk. It feels like a constant bombardment of emotional energy. And obviously, it's not constant. But when I think about working in a male facility where you work with someone for 3 years, they don't remember your name, and it's just things go along kind of smoothly for the most part. But yeah, the emotional manipulation and the emotional interactions and engagements that are going on consciously and unconsciously, it just seems like a much more difficult environment working with the women.
Now they try to wear you down, I think, emotionally, and to get what they want, it'll be the same every single day. And if you don't remember their name, oh my God, that's like that's like if you don't remember the conversation you had with them, how dare you? Yeah,
I agree. It was draining. I had an hour drive home every night, and I needed that drive home, that
Sure.
hour drive every night before I came home to my wife and kids. And it did take a toll on my career longevity. I retired and I still had another 4 years, 4 more years. I could have been, an RD, a regional director. I could have done a lot of stuff. I could have gone and just said, yes, okay, I'll be the full-time warden at the ADX, which is, the nation's most secure prison, if not the world's. And I was done. I was mentally done.
Yeah.
And before it had any lasting effect, I realized it was time for me to step away, focus on things that were more important, and work on, finding out who these cellies were at home. I'm like, I got all these cellies, I don't even know who they are. And I found out it was a wife, two kids, and getting to know them again.
yeah, very good. Carl, any last questions or anything like that?
That seems like a good note. I think
Yeah,
we've
to end it
we've
on.
asked the things we needed to ask, I believe.
Well, Michael, thank you again
Yeah.
for joining us.
Thanks,
If you want to
Michael.
we'll probably have you back on. I hope you found this enjoyable because I think Carl and me can come up with some more topics for you to kind of think about. We even do something called Tales from the Cage, so you could talk about some of your war stories as well. So I think that would be good. Some funny stories. We try to get some funny, hilarious things in there, and I think you'd probably have some stories to share. But again, thank you for joining us.
Doctors, thank you very much. It was my honor and pleasure to be on the show. I truly do appreciate it. I am very thankful for the work you guys are doing in getting the knowledge out there to the masses and introducing people to these traits, the concept, and just broadening people's horizons. You guys are doing good things. Thank you, doctors.
Oh, thank you,
Thank you.
Michael.
All right. So thank you again, everyone, for listening and watching. I hope you found this helpful. Again, you can always like and subscribe, comment on these videos. We will respond to them in future episodes. Again, you can like and subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. And we'll see you again next time. Thank you, everybody.